Engines at 65%, 3 engines running normally, 3 good fuel cells, 3 good APUs. Velocity 2,257 feet per second. Altitude 4.3 nautical miles. Downrange distance 3 nautical miles. Engines throttling up. 3 engines now at 104%.
Challenger, go at throttle up.
Challenger, go at throttle up.
1 minute 15 seconds. Velocity 2,900 feet per second. Altitude 9 nautical miles. Downrange distance 7 nautical miles.
And the flaming debris got smaller and smaller as it rained for 45 minutes into the Atlantic Ocean just southeast of the Kennedy Space Center at Cape Canaveral, Florida. Now in slow motion videotape, the critical scenes just before and during the explosion as the orbiter shuttle rides on its own liquid fuel tank and with the solid booster rockets on the sides. The catastrophic explosion left Mission Control in Houston stunned. At a news conference this afternoon, the first official word from NASA since the disaster, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration said simply and directly it did not know what had happened. For CBS News in New York, Dan Rather with Bruce Hall, CBS News at Cape Canaveral, Florida. We'll have full coverage of what happened today and reaction to it on the CBS Evening News later. And shortly, coming up next, in many of these stations, your early local news. For now, good day.
Throttling up, 3 engines now at 104%.
Challenger.
The worst disaster in the history of spaceflight. The Space Shuttle Challenger blows apart, killing all 7 people on board.
1 minute 15 seconds. Velocity.
NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw.
Good evening. It was a nightmare, a cruel, shocking end to what everyone expected to be another triumph for the Space Shuttle program. The Space Shuttle Challenger, with a school teacher and 6 regular astronauts on board, was consumed by a giant fireball less than 2 minutes after it was launched into bright blue Florida skies at 11:38 Eastern Time this morning. The path to space was filled with debris and death. All 7 people were killed. High technology, which we take so often for granted, turned on us. It was a tremendous blow, a loss so cruel, so unexpected that we're still trying to deal with it. The victims: Flight Commander Francis Dick Scobie. He'd flown in Vietnam. He was 46 years old. He leaves a wife and 2 children. Navy Commander Michael Smith, the pilot, also saw action in Vietnam, 40 years old. He leaves a wife and 3 children. Mission Specialist Ronald McNair, a physicist, was 36 years old, a wife and 2 children. Lieutenant Colonel Ellison Onizuka was an Air Force test pilot, 39 years old. He leaves a wife and 2 children. Electrical engineer Dr. Judith Resnick, 36 years old, a veteran astronaut. She was single. Payload specialist Gregory Jarvis was an engineer for Hughes Aircraft, 41 years old. He leaves a wife. And of course, the 7th crew member, New Hampshire schoolteacher Krista McAuliffe, 37 years old. She leaves a husband and 2 children. They died today in the worst accident ever to befall space explorers anywhere. NBC's Dan Molina was covering the launch from the Johnson Space Center in Houston.
It was a bitter cold but sparkling clear morning at Cape Canaveral. Here, the last seconds of the countdown.
3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
All the communications between the shuttle and Mission Control indicated everything was going fine. There was a sense of relief that the much-delayed flight was finally underway.
Engines at 65%, 3 engines running normally, 3 good fuel cells, 3 good APUs. Engines throttling up, 3 engines now at 104%.
Challenger, go at throttle up.
Challenger, go at throttle up.
It happened just over 1 minute into flight.
1 minute, 15 seconds. Velocity 2,900 feet per second. Altitude 9 nautical miles. Downrange distance 7 nautical miles.
From Mission Control, silence. Then the bland, chilling report.
We have a report from the flight dynamics officer that the vehicle has exploded. Flight director confirms that. We are looking at checking with the recovery forces to see what can be done at this point.
Slow motion. A search effort couldn't begin for some 15 minutes after this. Debris, they said, just kept raining from the sky. The head of the space shuttle program had no explanations, just sorrow at the tragedy.
At 11:40 a.m. this morning, space program experienced a national tragedy with the explosion of the Space Shuttle Challenger approximately a minute and a half after launch from here at the Kennedy Space Center.
Computer-enhanced video shows the explosion in detail. What explosion appears to happen at the rear of the spacecraft, around the main engines, perhaps in one of the two solid rocket boosters. Then a blast higher up. The shuttle was instantly a blazing fireball. NASA has appointed a committee of top engineers and scientists to investigate the catastrophe. Orders have been issued to impound all records concerning the flight, down to the personal notes of all the flight controllers. Dan Molina, NBC News at the Johnson Space Center, Houston.
And from ground level on Cape Canaveral, today's disaster was witnessed by thousands of people. Among them were space officials, technicians, and the families of the astronauts. Steve Delaney was on the scene to cover the launch for NBC News.
The day began in optimism and high spirits after the frustration of yesterday's scrubbed countdown. As the crew suited up to enter the Challenger, one of the technicians there revived an old schoolboy tradition and brought an apple to the teacher. For the McAuliffe family and the families of the other 6 crew members, this was to be a triumphant day. Grace and Ed Corrigan of Framingham, Massachusetts were in the VIP bleachers along with their daughter Lisa to watch their daughter Krista become the school teacher in space. Their faces mirrored what happened a little more than a minute into the flight.
Flight controllers here looking very carefully at the situation. Obviously a major malfunction.
The families have been secluded in the astronauts' quarters at the Space Center since just after the accident. In nearby Titusville, where the manned space program is the economy, the shock hit hard.
I just started crying and backed up and walked away because I knew it was really bad.
I wondered if anybody could be salvaged, you know, from something like that. That was really the first thing that went through my head.
Vice President George Bush arrived here late in the day, heading a delegation bearing the nation's condolences to the families.
You must try to understand that spirit, bravery, and commitment are what make not only the space program, but all of life worthwhile. We must never, as people in our daily lives or as a nation, stop exploring, stop hoping, stop discovering. We must press on.
There was a search in the Atlantic, but the searchers found so little that late in the afternoon, NASA conceded there was no indication of survivors. But that conclusion had been foreshadowed an hour earlier when the flag at the launch site was lowered to half-staff. Steve Delaney, NBC News at the Kennedy Space Center.
NBC science correspondent Robert Bazell has been covering the space shuttle flight since this program began. He's at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena tonight. And Bob, we were talking earlier, you were a friend of Dick Scobie. He had a premonition that something like this would happen someday, didn't he?
That's right, Tom. Dick Scobie worked with us on several of the missions, and in one in particular, I remember him telling me that one of these days the space shuttle was going to blow up. He said it was a large, complex piece of machinery with a lot of explosives, enough to get it going to 17,000 miles an hour to get it into orbit. He said, just like if you've taken enough airplane flights and eventually an airplane is going to crash, he said someday that's going to happen to the space shuttle. And he said, I certainly hope that when that does happen, it doesn't bring the shuttle program to an end.
Well, what about that? Do you think that the shuttle program obviously now has been frozen in place for a time? Do you think that we'll have to re-examine the whole concept of the shuttle?
Well, certainly they're going to have to find out what happened, and until they can allow another shuttle flight to go up, and that is going to bring the entire shuttle program to a halt until they do. Right now they're beginning a process called failure analysis, where they will try in detail, looking at those pictures we've just seen, looking at other pictures, looking at all the data that came from the spacecraft, to try to learn what went wrong, to try, if possible, in some laboratory to recreate the accident. One of the hypotheses, and it's just a hypothesis we've learned, is that a piece of fan in the main engine came apart, a piece of metal, and that flew into the main fuel tank. That's one of the very strong possibilities right now, but as I said, it's only a hypothesis, and it'll take a lot of analysis to find out exactly what the problem was.
Okay, Bob, and that main fuel tank, of course, contains 500,000 gallons of highly volatile liquid oxygen and hydrogen, and so it is an explosive bomb, in effect, that is propelling the shuttle into space. Our coverage of this space shuttle disaster will continue with reports on the men and women who lost their lives today, the reaction of President Reagan, and the school children that Krista McAuliffe left behind.
You won't believe
how great it holds
your lower dentures.
It's extra hold for lowers.
You won't believe how great it holds your lower dentures.
It's extra hold, and it's new from Fast Teeth. You won't believe how great it holds your lowers.
You've been traded, Rolaids, for acid and gas. Your performance is not up to tempo.
For better relief from acid and gas, switch to Soft Tempo. With 75% more acid-relieving medicine than the leading tablet. Switch to better relief. Switch to Soft Tempo.
Teamwork is what built America. And now teamwork has come to American banking. Local savings institutions bringing you banking nationwide, yet keeping decisions close to home. For banking that's powerful and personal, team up with us, the member near you of First Nationwide Network.
Dear Dad, just got back from my interview with Dow. Sounds like my kind of research. Finding new ways to grow more food, ways to help sick people. I'm gonna go for it, Dad. And I'm gonna try to make you proud.
Yes, you can make a difference in what tomorrow brings.
Love, David.
'Cause Dow lets you do great things.
Her little girl had said that she didn't want her mummy to go up in space, but Krista McAuliffe was a teacher, and a ride on the shuttle was the ultimate field trip. She wanted to bring the wonder and excitement of space back to her high school students in Concord, New Hampshire. And as NBC's Fred Briggs reports, they were waiting and watching today.
Her students were counting down with her.
4, 3, 2, 1.
When they saw the explosion, there was confusion. Was something wrong? The principal and teachers weren't certain either. Then it got very quiet as the horror of it began to register.
Would everybody please go back to class at this time?
They did go back for a while, but at 1 o'clock, school was closed. It had to close.
I felt as if my whole body blew up inside when I saw that. And I can just never be as shocked as I am now.
The students went home while the faculty and principal, Krista McAuliffe's colleagues, tried to collect themselves.
We were enjoying the entire event. We were celebrating with her. Then it stopped. That's all. It just stopped.
She had talked to her students in recent months about reaching for the stars. And now those students, members of the faculty, and her friends are reaching deep within themselves and trying to understand. Her training for the mission was shared with her students. She once told them that space exploration was in the future of every child. It was that kind of positive philosophy that led to her selection. She was one of 10 teachers chosen as finalists.
It's not often that a teacher is at a loss for words. I know my students wouldn't think so.
When she left her husband and 2 children in New Hampshire for Houston, her 6-year-old daughter Caroline wasn't very happy about it. Why wasn't she?
Because I didn't want to go in space, because I just want to stay around my house.
But she wanted to go for her family, her friends, her students, and the teachers who were runners-up.
When that shuttle goes, there might be one body. But there's going to be 10 souls that I'm taking with me.
Fred Briggs, NBC News, Concord, New Hampshire.
Last July, in an interview with New York radio station WNBC, Krista McAuliffe was asked if she had any fears about her space shuttle flight.
I feel that space travel is safe now. It's not that earlier feeling that, oh, it's going to blow up or something's going to happen. The shuttle is a really good, safe program. Right at this point, I feel that I'll be okay if I go up.
It was McAuliffe's 6 colleagues who formed the backbone of this mission. 4 were veterans of previous shuttle flights. They represented a cross-section of our nation, born in North Carolina, Hawaii, Washington State, and Ohio, South Carolina, Michigan. NBC's Bob Jamieson looks at their lives in the space program.
These are the faces of the tragedy. As the Challenger astronauts walked to the shuttle this morning, dreams, not tragedy, may have been foremost in their minds. This was the first space flight for 41-year-old Gregory Jarvis, a Hughes Aircraft Company engineer.
I've been charged up since last March, and so this is kind of a culmination of a dream come true.
36-year-old Robert McNair was proud of the pictures he took in space. McNair said he had dreamed about being an astronaut when he was in high school. But growing up poor in South Carolina, McNair never thought this would come true.
You know, where I came from, you know, that wasn't the kind of thing a black kid thought about. You know, I pursued science with that in my mind, and it wasn't until recently that I saw a break to make a dream, you know, come true.
McNair is survived by his wife and a son 3, a daughter 1. 36-year-old Judy Resnick often said she had confidence in NASA's safety record, even though she had to scramble from Discovery when liftoff for her first mission was scrubbed because the engine shut down after ignition. Resnick was single, a classical pianist with a PhD in engineering who had found her life's work in space.
I'd like to stay with the space program as long as they want me as an astronaut if I can, and if not, I'd like to stay in some other capacity because I think it's very important.
39-year-old Air Force Colonel Ellison Onizuka was the first Japanese-American in space. He leaves a wife and 2 children.
I'd certainly like to stay in the program as long as I can, as long as I can contribute to it and be a part of it.
Challenger pilot Mike Smith, 40, tested planes for the Navy before he became an astronaut. This was his first space mission.
Well, I am excited, and I guess I look at it like I look at flying new airplanes.
Commander Francis Scobie was idolized in Washington State, where he grew up. This was Scobie's 2nd shuttle mission, and he prophetically told friends that such a tragedy as today's was possible.
And we do these flights repetitively, and they get kind of a commonplaceness to them that's really not there because each one of them is an individual technological marvel in itself, and you lose that by watching so many of them. There are a lot of things that go on during a space flight, and it's not easy to do, and it may look easy from the outside. It's not easy from the inside.
Bob Jamieson, NBC News, New York.
A footnote about Krista McAuliffe. She received a gift from the space division of Caroon and Black. That's a New York insurance broker. That company gave her a $1 million personal accident policy for this shuttle flight. And an official of the company said the money should be paid to the McAuliffe family within a few days.
Incredible crowds have been reported at Color Tile stores this week. Why? Join me inside.
Could you tell us why all the excitement at Color Tile?
Oh, that's easy, darling. It's this beautiful half-price ceramic floor tile.
No! The reason is half price on this gorgeous mosaic tile.
Huh? It's half price on paint and wall covering that I came after. And this cuddly little blanket for buying only 80 bucks worth.
So, what are you waiting for? Color Tile's big half-price sale on right now.
I have a small business problem. My brother-in-law, Milton, couldn't sell tea in China. So I called the small business experts at AT&T, and they showed us new ways to use long distance to open a whole new territory. What'd you sell today, Milton?
6,000 switches.
Check the inventory. I have a small business problem.
Call AT&T Long Distance Services. We can help. AT&T, the right choice.
For gas pain and bloated feeling, Gas X has the fastest relief ingredient. Look, gas bubbles in beer. Add the leading antacid, add Gas X. Gas X got rid of the gas. Gas X has the fastest reliever for your gas pain and bloated feeling.
Ta-da! X-Lax.
The family friend.
I almost forgot.
Good thing I didn't.
Families trust chocolated X-Lax. It's easy to take and works so gently overnight.
A good friend to have when you need it.
Gentle chocolated X-Lax.
Make it your family friend.
President Reagan learned about the explosion in space while preparing for his State of the Union speech, which was scheduled for tonight. NBC White House correspondent Chris Wallace reports on the rest of the President's Day and reaction as the news spread throughout Washington.
The president was no different from any other American today, watching the tragic news on television. Late this afternoon, he addressed the nation about what he called a traumatic experience.
Nancy and I are pained to the core by the tragedy of the Shuttle Challenger. We know we share this pain with all of the people of our country. This is truly a national loss.
Mr. Reagan talked directly to the school children who watched the launch, saying the future belongs not to the faint-hearted, but the brave. And he emphasized today's accident will not stop the space program.
We'll continue our quest in space. There will be more shuttle flights and more shuttle crews, and yes, more volunteers, more civilians, more teachers in space. Nothing ends here.
Vice President Bush and the acting head of NASA were sent to Cape Canaveral to talk to the families and launch an investigation. But officials said Mr. Reagan has full confidence in the space agency. The president was to make his State of the Union speech tonight and planned to go ahead even after the accident, saying, "You can't stop governing the nation." But congressional leaders told the White House there was no interest in politics tonight, so Mr. Reagan canceled.
Let us remember in silent prayer those who were involved in the spacecraft shuttle accident just a few minutes ago off Florida.
On Capitol Hill, the House met for a brief prayer and then adjourned. But members of Congress wanted to talk. Some had ridden the shuttle themselves, like Utah Senator Garn.
Well, it's very difficult for me to talk about it because these were my friends.
Former astronaut John Glenn spoke of the triumphs of the space program.
Sometimes, though, we aren't perfect. And then there's a tragedy that brings us back to our own human frailties.
Congressmen in charge of shuttle funding said the program will go on, but only after a full investigation.
There may be delays that could go on for as much as a year with regard to future shuttle launches.
The president was going to mention the shuttle tonight in his State of the Union speech as an example of American progress. Instead, he had to deliver a eulogy to the Challenger crew, calling them pioneers on the last frontier. Chris Wallace, NBC News, at the White House.
This terrible event has touched the hearts of Americans all across the country, of course, and we'll have a report on how this nation reacted when we return.
Now there's an antacid that's ideal for us women, new calcitrol. It not only neutralizes more acid than Malox Plus or regular Mylanta, it gives us even more calcium than Tums. New calcitrol. It's the ideal antacid for women.
We asked 1,000 doctors if stranded on an island, which would they want? Tylenol, extra strength Tylenol, Advil, or Bayer? More doctors chose Bayer, nearly 2 to 1 over extra strength Tylenol. Bayer, the wonder drug that works wonders.
Minwax makes wood beautiful.
Minwax brings out wood's rich, warm glow, so it's as beautiful to look at as it is to touch. Wood finish by Minwax penetrates deep into wood, so it's easy to get outstanding results. And when topped with our own polyurethane, Minwax protects against life's hard knocks and tough spills, letting wood's natural beauty show through.
Minwax makes wood beautiful.
Why change a good thing? That's what I asked when Oldsmobile redesigned the Delta 88. Oh, then I drove it. Wait till you see how it handles. It's front-wheel drive, too. But inside, plenty of room to stretch. Our Delta 88 is the family car that didn't forget the family. Some things never change.
Borrow the car, Dad?
Some things never change.
There is a special feeling in Oldsmobile.
From coast to coast, people watched replays of the Shuttle Challenger's destruction in the skies today, and they reacted with disbelief and sorrow.
There could have been a tearing when the rocket went into great acceleration, its fastest point.
The only thing I could think about with those kids in that auditorium and the trauma they must be going, and what a shock it must be for them to watch something like that happen to their teacher. That's what I was thinking of.
Really makes you sick to your stomach is the only way that I can explain my feeling. I was sick to my stomach.
I was hurt. As an American, I was hurt. And I still feel it in my heart that we've had a great loss.
I felt like every one of them was my sons and daughters. I really did.
Triumph has marked and tragedy has marred America's space effort in the past. With each success, new heights were set. With each failure came a resolve to continue. And as NBC's Gary Cutley tells us now, the American spirit remains undaunted by the magnitude of even today's disaster.
From the moment the Wright brothers proved it could be done, challenging the law of gravity has captured the imagination and exacted a human price. The Hindenburg disaster came to symbolize that.
All the folks between us, this is terrible. This is one of the worst catastrophes in the world.
Man was not meant to fly, skeptics said, but did. Was not meant to break the sound barrier, but did. Flew higher and faster until there was only space to conquer.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
The space program, too, began with failures, to some a warning that man had met his limit. But technology triumphed. John Glenn orbited the Earth and came home a hero. For behind the cold technology, it has always been the human spirit which has driven man into space. There were losses. 3 astronauts killed during a launch pad exercise in 1967. And there was the ultimate triumph.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
And then there was today, an epitaph for 7 Americans, written large and hauntingly on a beautiful blue sky. Senator John Glenn has been there.
I guess in our human existence there is triumph and there is tragedy. And man tries many things. And we advance as a whole human race because we succeed most of the time. We make advances, whether it's in space or engineering or health or medical things. Sometimes, though, we aren't perfect. And then there's a tragedy that brings us back to our own human frailties.
But as we contemplate our frailty, we have also been fascinated by pictures from Uranus and its moons 2 billion miles away. Pictures from Voyager showing new worlds to discover and explore. Can there be any doubt that one day, despite the risk, man will follow? Garrick Utley, NBC News.
We'll have a special report on this Challenger tragedy tonight on NBC at 10, 9 Central Time.
This is beef burgundy from Light and Elegant. This is beef burgundy from Lean Cuisine. Shrimp Creole from Light and Elegant. Shrimp Creole from Lean Cuisine. Sliced turkey, Light and Elegant. Sliced turkey, Lean Cuisine. Light and Elegant just wanted you to know what you've been missing with Lean Cuisine. 8 entrees you only get from Light and Elegant. The choice is yours. Beef Stroganoff from Lean Cuisine or beef Stroganoff from Light and Elegant.
Banker is America's largest full-service real estate company. And these days, you don't get bigger unless you do it better. Coldwell Banker, the home sellers, a member of the Sears Financial Network.
Tomorrow morning on Today, a complete report on the explosion without warning of the Space Shuttle Challenger. What does it mean for the future of the space program? Tomorrow morning on Today.
Senator Stanton!
Yes?
You've got dirty dentures.
No! I just soaked them.
Soaking's not enough. That's why your dentures are dirtier than they should be. Brushing with Denture Cream cleans denture film much better. Look, when tested against Efferdent, Denture Cream denture toothpaste gets denture film much cleaner.
Nearly twice as clean.
So don't get caught with dirty dentures. Brush them clean with minty-tasting Denture Cream or mouthwash fresh Denture Gel.
It's a winner.
Now, if you'll permit me, some personal thoughts. As we try, all of us, to rise above our grief, we struggle for words, for thoughts that may get us through this dark day, but everything seems to be so inadequate. What plays again and again in my mind is this: great enterprises require great risks. The men and women who died today knew that. They were the risk takers. They believed in the physical and intellectual challenge of space flight, and in that, they were an extension of all of us. We rode with them. They gave courage to even the most timid among us. Now, we share the grief of their friends and families. The shock will pass, of course, as great as it is. Their spirit will live on. Their adventurous ways will be picked up and carried on by others, and the frontiers of space and knowledge will be expanded. And finally, to those families, as we shared your pride, we share your sorrow. I'm Tom Brokaw. Good night from all of us at NBC News.
An achingly empty Launch Pad 39B in Florida tonight. Newly refurbished Launch Pad 39B. Space Shuttle Challenger was the first to leave its embrace in more than a decade. It blasted off in a blaze of fire amid the ice on the pad. A scant minute later, gone in all a consuming ball of fire. All that was challenging, all the technology and hopes, and 7 people riding on the top of 500,000 gallons of rocket kick. 6 astronauts and a teacher who was us all, gone forever in a matter of seconds. Hours later, national mourning and a national eulogy from the president.
For the manner in which they lived their lives. We will never forget them, nor the last time we saw them, this morning, as they prepared for their journey and waved goodbye, and slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God.
This is a CBS News special report. Disaster in space. Reporting from CBS News headquarters in New York, here is Dan Rather.
It was there for all to see. Open, above board, almost routine. Another space shuttle launch. So many saw it happen. So little is still known tonight about why it happened. Tonight, the search planes and desperate rescue helicopter crews that had looked for signs of survivors all day in vain, tonight they were recalled. They will start again at first light. Ships are still crisscrossing off the coast of Florida. All they have found in the cold Atlantic is small debris from the once mighty Challenger. The largest pieces of that debris, no bigger than 2 feet wide and under 10 feet long. That is all that remains tonight of 7 hero pioneers and tons of high tech. Some of America's best and brightest young people, some of the most complex machinery and electrical apparatus in the history of humankind. It happened at Challenger's moment of full thrust, point of highest stress, where metal meets air at 2,000 miles an hour. It happened in real time before noon, a slow-motion horror for all who watched.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. We have main engine start. 3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff. And it has cleared the tower.
The president, like all Americans, watched this on television.
The future doesn't belong to the faint-hearted. It belongs to the brave.
Challenger, go at throttle up. Challenger, go at throttle up.
Obviously a major malfunction. We have a report from the flight dynamics officer that the vehicle has exploded.
They had a hunger to explore the universe and discover its truths. They wished to serve, and they did. The Challenger crew was pulling us into the future, and we'll continue to follow them.
Joining us now in Los Angeles is Leo Krupp, a former shuttle test pilot for Rockwell International. Leo Krupp, good to have you with us this evening. What I would like for you to do, first of all, is let's take a look of the videotape from today. Talk us through it, where the places are, where there are questions, where the suspicions are. But before we do that, let's take a look at the scale model we have in the studio with us, Leo Krupp, and check me as we go along here. Just a reminder that the space orbiter, the spaceship itself, the Space Shuttle Challenger, is attached to this huge fuel tank which contains liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen. Liquid hydrogen, highly explosive. Off on the sides are the solid rocket fuel boosters, 2 of them. And in space shuttles, the plan is for the whole apparatus, the engines at the tail of the space shuttle, plus the solid rocket boosters, all to go off the launch pad in one big thrust, and it has to be throttled back a bit, then throttled forward, and as it reaches just past the 2-minute mark, the plan is for the solid rocket boosters to jettison away and fall away. The space shuttle with its engines down here continues on up using the fuel out of this tank on upward toward space, and eventually the big fuel tank itself drops off, leaving the shuttle to orbit the Earth. Now, that's the way it has worked in the past. Now, Leo Krupp, I want to remind you, if I may, or perhaps point out to you if you had a chance to read it, that the United Press International says tonight that speculation about what caused the Space Challenger to explode shortly after takeoff Tuesday focuses primarily on the spacecraft's large fuel tank, but NASA officials declined comment on what may have triggered the blast. Now, with that in mind, let's try to take a look now at the videotape of the blast-off today. Leo, as we wait for the videotape to get completely down to the point where we want to take it up, had you heard that speculation about the suspicion area focusing on the main tank?
Well, there's no doubt, Dan, that the main tank was the explosion, the fuel for the explosion, and what triggered it, I think, is conjecture right now until NASA has a chance to look at all the items. There were some suspicious flame patterns around the nozzle area of the left, what appeared to be the left solid rocket booster, and that could have been the ignition source, but I'm sure that everybody agrees the fuel for the explosion came from the main tanks, from the external tank.
Well, let's take a look now at the videotape and have you talk it through us, emphasizing as we go through this that there may be many theories and many hypotheses, but no one at this hour actually knows what happened. This was the scene at the launch site.
7, 6, we have main engine start, 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff of the
everything in the launch looked perfectly normal up to the point when he was going through max dynamic pressure, and this camera angle will be looking up the stern or up the tailpipe of the vehicle as it gets up, so you can't really see too much. But just as he goes through the max dynamic pressure region where he throttles his engines back, the 3 main engines back to 65%, and then he throttles them back up to 104 after he's through this area, the camera will switch from the stern view to a side view. And when it switches to the side view is when you can see the first thing that looks abnormal, and those are some little what appear to be flame leaks around the aft end of the left booster, which is the one closest to you as you're viewing this.
Now, we're just about to see that, I think, Leo Krupp, in a few seconds.
Okay, as we switch to the side view, just watch toward the aft end of the solid rocket booster, and you'll see some little flame patterns come out, and those appear to be the ignition source. There you can see them, and there's no doubt the fuel for the explosion came from the external tank. But the question is what caused it, and NASA, I'm sure, will have an answer for this after they recover all the debris and look at all the data.
Now, Leo Krupp, let's do as we have done during the day, take a closer look at the critical moments just before and during the explosion in slow motion. This is the side view that you mentioned.
Okay, you can see the little flame leaks coming back there now, just forward of the nozzle. And you'll see one that impinges, jumps up forward and impinges up on the belly of the vehicle up near where the umbilical from the external tank right there, and that provided the ignition source which resulted in the catastrophic explosion.
Leo Krupp, former shuttle test pilot for Rockwell International. So our viewers and listeners can understand the area in which you called attention as one of the suspicion areas, while emphasizing all the way through that nobody actually can know what happened and why. What you were talking about, Leo, is was this area, this being the solid rocket booster on the left side from the pilot's position in the capsule. Right down in here is where you first saw those flashes.
That was the first thing that looked out of the ordinary or abnormal about the flight. Up to that point, everything looked perfectly nominal. It looked like a perfect launch.
And then, very quickly, there was a brighter flame a little further up on what appeared to be the area of the main fuel tank, that is the liquid fuel tank, liquid oxygen, and liquid hydrogen, and then very quickly the massive fireball explosion.
That's right, and it appeared that this happened so rapidly that the crew did not have any time to react. There is a provision for the crew to do a fast separation. If they know something is amiss in a solid rocket booster or the tank, they can do what we call a fast separation, and they can separate the shuttle from that package. But this occurred so rapidly that it appeared that the crew did not have any time to react at all to the pending disaster.
Leo, on our model, what you're talking about, there is a provision where if the commander and pilot have an indication in time, if they can quickly separate just the space orbiter itself away from all of the fuel, but there's no indication anywhere at any time today that they had even a second or two to do that. No indication at all. The other thing we want to mention is the large fuel tank, the one that United Press International says is the focus of the investigation as it begins as to where the explosion may have started. That massive external fuel tank is manufactured by Martin Marietta Aerospace in Louisiana. It contained 500,000 gallons of highly explosive fuel. The fuel is the most explosive element in the whole system, but we emphasize that nobody at Martin Marietta Aerospace or with NASA is saying that the explosion actually began in this tank. They simply do not know. Thank you very much, Leo Krupp in Los Angeles. We want to go now to Houston, where our old friend astronaut Alan Bean, former astronaut and present artist and painter Alan Bean, who flew on both the Apollo and Skylab missions. It's tough, I know, but Alan Bean, what runs through your mind as you watch the launch, having been there yourself? And if I may, I'm particularly interested in, based on your experience, what was happening to the crew members minute by minute from the seconds before launch right on through this disaster.
Well, Dan, from the time you get in up till about 15 minutes, you've got a fairly leisurely pace, and so you're thinking about the launch and you're thinking about how the mission's going to go. When it gets to be about 15 minutes to launch, things start to pick up speed, and you begin to just concentrate on your gauge readings, what the ground's telling you, and getting ready for the launch. At launch time, when the main engines ignite, you're watching the instruments. You're not thinking about anything except, what is it that I'm seeing? Is this right? And if it isn't right, what do I do? And that kind of mental attitude continues all the way through launch. So I feel fairly certain that the crew members, all during the first minute or minute and a half of launch, were looking at their gauges, listening to Houston and thinking, it's going well, everything's going good, everything's going just like we hoped it would go. And my feeling personally is that is what they thought all the time.
Now this happened with such suddenness, Alan Bean, and there was no indication, no one heard any indication, no one saw any indication that the spacecraft was in any difficulty whatsoever. Things happened so quickly in there. We're talking about seconds and in some cases nanoseconds. Speculation pure and simple, but would the commander and the pilot have had a gauge indication that something was wrong?
One of the things that you do when you design spaceships, of course, is you try to design them so they never fail, and that doesn't work. So if that doesn't work, then you say, what parts could possibly fail? Maybe a computer. Okay, we'll put 5 of them on board. How about the external tank? Well, we can't put 5 of those on board. They're too big. We better build the one we have and make sure it works. Don't bother putting a lot of instrumentation on there, because if something does go wrong, there's nothing you can do anyway. So I feel that if it was a failure of the external tank or the solid rocket booster up in the middle of it somewhere, like Leo's talking about, that there's no instrumentation there that the crew can readily get an indication that something's going wrong. So from their point of view, from their perspective, everything looks good.
There were no ejection seats in this space shuttle. There were in some of the very earliest of the space shuttle flights. There were ejection seats in the crew area, but none in this one today.
No, Dan, and my personal feeling as a result of what I just said is, even if this had been the first flight of the space shuttle, where John Young and Bob Crippen with ejection seats, that this kind of failure happened so fast and apparently with no warning, that they wouldn't have been able to use them. This kind of catastrophe is not what the seats are designed for. This is a catastrophe that just cannot be allowed to happen. In this case, of course, it did, and the engineers are going to have to go back and take a look, because this there is no crew member recourse for this kind of failure.
Inside the cockpit of the space capsule, is there flame-resistant, flame-retardant material in there?
There is, but there's nothing that could absorb the energy that is in either the solid rocket boosters. Looks like neither of them came apart because we could see them after the explosion, but there's certainly nothing in there that could absorb the force of an explosion of the hydrogen and oxygen that's in the tank, nor, I might add, when this occurs, the shuttle would be put at a strange attitude relative to the air. It's going 2,000 miles an hour, as you pointed out, maximum airflow, maximum airspeed. The shuttle would come apart. It just can't be built for those kinds of forces. This kind of failure cannot be allowed to occur when you design a spaceship. It's that simple.
And there's every indication today that it exploded in that great fireball almost instantly. Alan Beam,
yes.
Thank you very much for being with us this evening. The 7-member crew of Space Shuttle Challenger was varied from different backgrounds with different training. But as Bruce Hall reports, what these heroes shared was the pursuit of excellence.
And then
it was going to be Krista McAuliffe's flight. The 37-year-old Concord, New Hampshire schoolteacher, married, mother of 2, had captured the attention of the nation. She was going to be the first private citizen, not connected in any way to the space program, to be given a ride on the shuttle. She was picked from more than 11,000 teacher applicants and was fiercely proud of representing her profession.
I feel a great responsibility and excitement this year that I'm representing my profession.
Shuttle Commander Francis Dick Scobie was happy to be part of the teacher mission. His wife is a prominent educator, and he believed the space program needed the involvement of teachers and children. He was a space veteran who had flown aboard the Challenger in April 1984, and before leaving, he told friends that the future of mankind depended on flights like this to outer space.
We have to expand into outer space to keep our hands on the resources we need to make the human race survive. So I think it's our survival eventually.
The pilot was 40-year-old Mike Smith, a Navy commander and veteran of Vietnam. It was his first flight, and safety was his primary concern.
My primary interest is to make sure that we get up and back safely.
36-year-old Judy Resnick was the second American woman to go in space, flying aboard the Challenger in August '84. She was a classical pianist and had a PhD in electrical engineering. A research scientist, she was the only one aboard who was single. Ellison Onizuka and Ron McNair had gone through special training so they could take a walk in space to fix any emergencies that might occur aboard the shuttle. It was Onizuka's second flight. He was an aerospace engineer and a pilot who had spent much of his career teaching other pilots at the elite test pilot school. 36-year-old McNair had a PhD from Massachusetts Institute of Technology and was an expert in the field of lasers. It was his second trip into space. 41-year-old Greg Jarvis was overjoyed to finally get aboard the shuttle. He had been bumped twice, first by Senator Jake Garn and later by Congressman Bill Nelson. It was his first flight, but he was the one who tried to relieve the pressure on the others. It was his idea to take Krista McAuliffe for a bike ride when she became restless following Sunday's postponement. It was a crew doing what they know best, a crew doing what they wanted to do in life. Bruce Hall, CBS News.
As Bruce Hall mentioned, Senator Jake Garn, Cactus Jake Garn of Utah, flew in a shuttle mission. He was the senator who flew in one of the shuttle missions, followed, of course, by a member of the House of Representatives. And Senator Garn has just returned from talking to the families at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. He's been kind enough to take a moment or two at Andrews Air Force Base in suburban Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C., to talk with us. Senator Garn, is there anything that you got from the families? Did they say anything to you that you feel you can or want to pass along?
Well, I was fortunate enough to go with the Vice President and Senator John Glenn to visit with the families. And obviously, it was a very difficult meeting. You always feel inadequate and not knowing exactly what to say to try and comfort the families. The thing that I was so impressed with is Mrs. Scobie, the commander's wife, stood up when we came in and said, "Mr. Vice President and Senators, I think I speak for all of the families here that we want you to know that we want the space program to continue. We don't want it delayed. We know that our loved ones would want it to continue, and as tragic an accident as this has been, and as sad as it is, don't let it stop the space program. It was very, very touching and very difficult for us.
As any of us who've known them knows, Senator Garn, and as Tom Wolfe wrote so eloquently in his book, The Right Stuff, being a pilot's wife, a military pilot's wife, who some of these women had been for a very long time, is trying under the best of circumstances, to say nothing of circumstances in which your husband and the father of your children is going to ride a machine such as one of these space shuttles. You made that trip once. At about the 1 minute and 12 or 15 second mark, do you remember what you were thinking on your flight?
Well, during that period of time, the solid rocket boosters burn for 2 minutes, and it's very rough and it's very noisy. And so you thinking how exciting it is, how wonderful it is within a few more minutes, about another 6 minutes, you're going to be in orbit and be able to look back at the Earth. And when the 2 minutes are over, it dramatically smooths down, so you're relieved to get rid of the solid rocket boosters. They were about halfway to that point. I'm sure they were extremely excited, ecstatic about getting into space after being delayed a couple of days. I'm sure they were very happy and very excited at that point, and thinking about what a wonderful, fantastic experience it would be in just a few minutes to be orbiting the Earth.
Senator Garn, do you remember what you saw and what you heard at that moment? Were you praying? Did you have your eyes open or closed? What did you see and feel and hear?
Well, at that moment, again, you're halfway through the solid rocket booster burn. As I remember, Charlie Walker, who was sitting next to me in the mid-deck, were clapping and shaking hands because we came within only 55 seconds of being canceled, and that was all we had left in our flight window for that morning. So we were cheering and clapping and shaking hands about that point into the flight.
Senator Garn, thank you very much for being with us this evening. I trust that you passed along, you and Vice President Bush, the respect, honor, and sympathy of the nation to those families. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. We did.
The stunned shock in the hometown of teacher Krista McAuliffe. The equally solemn and sad reaction in the Houston suburb where so many NASA astronauts and employees live, Clear Lake City, Texas, near the Johnson Space Center. Martha Teichner is there.
The town where astronauts live and work closed ranks. There was no information, just this sign, turn on your lights and pray for our astronauts. People did. An armed guard stood outside Mission Commander Dick Scobie's house tonight. The Johnson Space Center, where reporters are usually dished out data by the pound, got nothing. There were no news releases, no interviews. Nobody connected with the space shuttle was allowed to talk. A stunning, staggering silence was NASA's response to the tragedy that was inevitable someday. From those terrible minutes just after the launch, as the technicians who worked with the crew, helped them in and out of their simulators, called them by their first names, realized what had happened. There was a compulsion to be near a television, to see the explosion replayed over and over. Tourists stood near NASA workers, their faces full of their feelings.
7 people snuffed, and the only thing good you can say about it is that they didn't feel it.
But when you saw it, it totally was engulfed. My God, what a sight.
One by one, the flags up and down NASA Road 1 were lowered to half-mast, and people stared at them, disbelieving. The walls at PT's restaurant are covered with pictures of astronauts, including 3 members of the Shuttle Challenger's dead crew. No astronauts came in tonight for dinner or happy hour.
Well, it just doesn't seem possible that they never come in here again.
So far, mourning has been an individual matter. Here, where astronauts live and work, it is everybody's tragedy. Martha Teichner, CBS News, Clear Lake City, Texas.
This horrible tragedy, this moment so vividly burned in our minds, it is one of those events that many of us are likely never to forget. Even now, many hours after we first saw that horrific ball of flame, it is hard to believe it happened at all. Bernard Goldberg looks at America's reaction to the deaths of 7 of our own.
T-minus 15 seconds. In the American mind, it had become routine, all those successful launches. In reality, of course, it never was routine, not for all the Americans who would watch close up, and certainly not for the people who would ride the shuttle into space. No, it never was routine, and at 11:39 Eastern Standard Time this morning, the proof exploded before our eyes.
You just can't believe that something like that has happened initially, and then when it sinks in, you know, it's just like, you know, losing a member of your family.
Today, our shock turns to sadness. We salute those who risked and gave their lives to serve our country at the last great frontier.
And in the small towns around the Cape, this American tragedy was a community tragedy as well.
This community has been a part of the Space Center and its progress. We've shared the joys. Certainly today, we've shared a great tragedy.
I was a school teacher myself for 31.5 years, and I taught the age that she left, and it really touched my heart. I have grandchildren the same age.
I was at first shocked because I didn't know what had happened and thought it was a dream that you'd wake up out of.
They were pioneers with high hopes and old-fashioned courage. They made it look like fun. So, in the American mind, it was becoming routine. Of course, it never was. This is Bernard Goldberg.
President Reagan had planned to deliver his State of the Union speech tonight, and at one point today, the president said he was going ahead with it, but he quickly changed his mind just a bit later, and instead, as Leslie Stahl tells us, he scrapped the State of the Union speech, postponed it until next week for a special address today to a nation in a state of shock.
President Reagan ordered all flags on public buildings flown at half-staff, proclaiming a week of national mourning, leading the country in what he called our pain. The president said, "I just can't rid myself of the thought of the sacrifice and the families."
The families of the 7, we cannot bear, as you do, the full impact of this tragedy. But we feel the loss, and we're thinking about you so very much. Your loved ones were daring and brave, and they had that special grace, that special spirit that says, give me a challenge, and I'll meet it with joy.
The president has taken a keen interest in the space program ever since 1982, when he was the honored guest at the happy landing of the shuttle Columbia. Ironically, the Challenger was flown overhead that day in a proud salute to the commander-in-chief. Despite the sorrow of today's tragedy, the president said the program will go on.
There will be more shuttle flights and more shuttle crews, and yes, more volunteers, more civilians, more teachers in space. Nothing ends here. Our hopes and our journeys continue.
It was President Reagan's idea to send civilians into space and to make a teacher the first. He spoke to the teacher finalists in June.
When one of you blasts off from Cape Kennedy next January, you will be representing that hope and opportunity and possibility. You will be the emissary to the next generation of American heroes.
The President and Mrs. Reagan are here tonight at home, Mr. Reagan having postponed his upbeat State of the Union address. At first, he said he was going to go ahead with the speech because, and I quote, "You can't stop governing the nation because of a tragedy of this kind." But then after congressmen, Republicans and Democrats urged a cancellation, it was finally decided that the budget was not what most Americans want to hear about tonight. This is Leslie Stahl at the White House.
From the great Atlantic Ocean to the wide Pacific shore, a nation mourns 7 heroes. From New Hampshire to Florida to Texas and beyond, they saw a space shuttle explode into smithereens. 7 lives lost just like that. The danger of space flight is real. That was real fire, real flames, and real death. But says President Reagan, we will continue our quest in space. Is it worth the risk? Has the space program come too far, too fast? We'll examine those questions when our coverage of the Challenger disaster continues.
This is CBS.
Does that work? I like it.
There's a story
Mr.
just how bad it is.
We've only had 7 confirmed cases.
I got it.
So the windows just pop out.
Did I use it? Channel 3 Eyewitness News. 1985 winner of Connecticut's Associated Press Award for Best Newscast. When you watch us, you see the difference. Come home to Channel 3 Eyewitness News.
The Secrets of the Sandman, tomorrow at 5:30.
A CBS News special report, Disaster in Space, continues. Here again is Dan Rather.
It has been in recent years so easy to think of the space program as so many comfortable bus rides by technocrats. So easy to forget that our astronauts were adventurers. As much as the Argonauts of Greek myth, as much as Sir Francis Drake and Lindbergh, adventurers riding a pillar of flame. And though the 2.5 decades of manned space flight, there have been moments of terror and death. Almost exactly 19 years ago, January 27, 1967, a confident astronaut crew, Virgil Gus Grissom, Edward White, and Roger Chaffee, they met death when fire swept their Apollo 1 command module during a ground test. In 1970, astronaut James Lovell floated in weightlessness, but then Apollo 13 exploded on the way to the moon.
Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here. We've had a main B bus underboat.
We had a main B bus underboat. An oxygen tank had been mishandled during manufacturing. Apollo 13 finally returned safely to Earth. The dangers of space travel apply to all. The Soviet Union, the only other nation to send manned vehicles into space, has reported the deaths of at least 4 cosmonauts. On October 12, 1964, a Soviet cosmonaut completed a successful 24-hour space odyssey, but in 1967, he would become the first person to die during a space flight when his Soyuz 1 crashed after re-entry. With us tonight in Colorado Springs, Colorado, is an authority on the Soviet space program. He is Nicholas Johnson, advisory scientist for Teledyne Brown Engineering. Good evening, and thank you very much for being with us. The Soviet Union, at last report, had reported today's American space disaster in one line. Does this put them ahead? Can it put them ahead?
No, it doesn't put them ahead.
And how much do we know about the Soviet accidents over the years? Now, I mentioned that I know we're having some audio problems there, and we hope those get cleared up for you. That the Soviets have reported the deaths of 4 cosmonauts, but you and others have written that there's some reason to believe that they've had more accidents than they've been willing to make public.
Well, we only understand that they've had 4 actual fatalities on 2 different missions about 4 years apart, the first in '67 and the second in 1971. But at 4-year intervals, there have been 3 other near-fatal accidents, the last occurring in September 1983, when 2 cosmonauts almost suffered an identical fate to what happened today.
The Soviets have favored unmanned space exploration, have they not? Well, they've accomplished many things with manned space flight, to make no mistake about it, but they've favored unmanned exploration.
Well, if you look at the ledger, then certainly they have launched more unmanned spacecraft than we have. But they've also launched more manned spacecraft, so percentage-wise, it's pretty much equal.
They don't use the same kind of propulsion system that we do for launch and getting into orbit, though.
No, they don't use the more exotic liquid hydrogen, liquid oxygen. They simply use liquid oxygen and kerosene, which dates back to the V-2 rockets of World War II.
To have it clearly understood, the V-2 rockets used more solid rocket fuel. So go ahead.
No, they were liquid fuels, but they were simply kerosene and oxygen and not liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen.
And the technique, the knowledge of how to use liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen as we do in getting our space shuttles into orbit, the Soviets have that technology and know-how, or they don't, or we don't know.
They have never demonstrated it, but we believe they're working on 3 new vehicles, one very similar to the space shuttle, which will use exactly the same technique.
Mr. Johnson, when I asked you the question at the beginning where you had some trouble hearing whether this could put the Soviets ahead, you study the Soviet space program very closely, and you have for a long time. It's always hard to make a comparison, But obviously, clearly, this is going to set back the U.S. space program. And what advantage will that be to the Soviets? Are they in a position to take special advantage of that?
I don't think it will give them advantages because we're not traveling the same path in space right now. They are concentrating on manned occupation of low-altitude satellites. For the last 6 years, they've occupied that station for about half of each year. What we have been doing recently is simply deploying satellites and gaining new experience, which we lost in the late 70s. I don't think that this actually gives the Soviets an advantage. They're simply applying their techniques in a different manner.
Mr. Johnson, we want to move on to other coverage, but why have the Soviets never put a man on the moon? They tried for a long while.
Well, I think what happened, they were running very close behind us in 1968. And when we were successful with Apollo 8 around the moon in December of that year, then their program, which was a little bit farther behind, simply got canceled because they could not catch up quickly enough.
Thank you very much, Nicholas Johnson, Advisory Scientist for Teledyne Brown Engineering. The Space Shuttle, a truck, a kind of flying workhorse, reusable and lately used for the first few times as part of the U.S. military space program. This brought something brand new to the whole Space Shuttle program, secrecy and news blackouts about U.S. military payloads. CBS News Defense Department correspondent David Martin reports it's no secret the Pentagon is no fan of the shuttle, now more than ever.
Later this year, the Space Shuttle Challenger was to have carried a top-secret military payload into space, one of 5 military missions scheduled for the Space Shuttle this year. Now the Challenger is no more, now that all shuttle flights are grounded indefinitely, Pentagon officials are scrambling to determine just what effect today's tragedy will have on the military's race into space. The Pentagon is counting on the shuttle to carry vital communications and intelligence satellites, as well as Star Wars experiments, into space. By the 1990s, officials foresee a need for 24 military space launches a year, more if a Star Wars defense against Soviet missiles is actually deployed. With that kind of schedule, the Air Force already has warned that if one of the shuttles were to be lost, quote, we could never catch up.
We have main engine start. We have a cutoff.
Even before today's catastrophe, there were increasing doubts about NASA's ability to meet the Pentagon's space needs. So the Air Force is hedging its bets by building new rockets to back up the shuttle. The first of the new rockets will not be ready until 1988. By then, the Air Force will have run out of these older Titan rockets, which it currently uses. Now it appears the Air Force will run out much sooner, as the rockets are used to fill the void left by the loss of Challenger. Officials say some of the damage to the military space program can be limited by the fact that the Pentagon has the power to bump scientific and commercial payloads from the shuttle.
One way or another, Pentagon officials say they will figure a way to get all their satellites and experiments into space. But today's disaster will almost certainly add billions to the cost. This is David Martin at the Pentagon.
This is the 25th year of manned space exploration, just 25 years. A mere speck of time, really. And we've gone from brief space flights to short turnaround space shuttles. We launch satellites and walk in space so routinely. But are we pushing the limit? Should we slow down? Joining us again from the Johnson Space Center near Houston is former astronaut Alan Bean. Also in our Washington CBS News studio, Congressman Mervyn Dimely, head of the Congressional Space and Technology Caucus, and here in New York, Myron Malkin, a former director of the Space Shuttle program. Gentlemen, what about it? Are we pushing the limit, and should we slow down? First, former astronaut Alan Bean.
Dan, I don't think so. I think one of the things that I've noticed in NASA all the time I was there, some 18 years, was that they never compromised safety. They never pushed too hard because of cost. They never compromised safety because of any political pressure or anything. So I feel that whatever went wrong was a mistake and will be rectified. But I don't believe it was because NASA was pushing too hard. I feel they never go beyond the limit of safe operations.
Congressman Mervyn Dimely, as head of the Congressional Space and Technology Caucus, have the budget pressures on NASA been costly to us? And has that been one of the things to put the pressure on the space agency?
More than budget pressures. First, NASA has an excellent safety record, certainly better than the automobile industry, better than the aircraft industry. However, as your Pentagon correspondent just commented, NASA is under great pressure from the military, great pressure from the Congress, from the administration, from the private sector and from the insurance industries, this accident will, of course, increase insurance rates, and that's a pressure. And we are under pressure from possible competition from a consortium in Europe. So NASA is under great pressure from a number of sources to make these explorations profitable or self-supporting. And therefore, as a result of that, they have to meet a very rigid schedule. Any interruption in that schedule throws the whole NASA program back. And I believe that the time has come for us to just step back just a minute and reorder our schedule priorities and try to slow down the program just a little bit.
You're not recommending, or are you, any reduction in NASA's budget? You're saying let up a little on the schedule.
Indeed. In fact, NASA has done very well. Over the last 5 years, they've had a net increase in their budget. I believe that they're doing an excellent job. I think, however, the schedule is too much like the Washington, D.C., New York shuttle run.
Myron Malkin here in New York, former director of the Space Shuttle program. Your view, an overview, and as objectively as you can, have we been moving too fast? Have the pressures been too great on the Space Shuttle schedule?
No, I don't believe that we're moving too fast. I agree with Alan Bean that the primary issue in NASA has always been safety, and the shuttle is designed with that thought in mind. The exact cause of this, of the disaster today, has yet to be determined. It's necessary to keep moving forward, and I don't believe that we've compromised safety in any way at the present pace. The shuttle program has been set up, and the manufacturing facilities and launch facilities have been constructed with schedule in mind as we proceeded forward, and I think they're adequate to do that.
Astronaut Alan Bean, what about this report today? We're talking about safety and whether the pressure on NASA to get these launches, particularly after they've been delayed a time or two, up there and out there and move on to the next one. When you were an astronaut, if someone had told you that there were icicles forming on the bottom of the spaceship, as happened this morning, would you have been concerned about that, even if NASA said, well, we've looked it over and we've delayed for 2 hours? Would that have been of concern to you?
If someone mentioned it, I would say to myself, I wonder what having icicles on there means. And I would say, I know that back in Launch Control Center, they're checking with the experts on icicles, if you will, to see what he thinks, or the team that's concerned with temperature or the environment around the spacecraft and the booster. And I would feel confident if they came back to me and said, icicles are okay, that they said that from a position of knowledge, testing, study. They didn't just look out the window and say, it ought to be okay, I think it's okay. They would have had data to prove it's okay, or they wouldn't have gone. They'd have said, let's don't go, we'll do some testing and go some other day.
And what about the report that over the weekend that one of the cranes that was helping to set up the shuttle launch accidentally bumped into one of the fuel tanks? Now, Mr. Moore, the director, current director of the Space Center, this afternoon when asked that question said, well, yes, in effect that happened, but we checked it out and we think everything was okay. Would that have been of concern to you?
No, because once again, Mr. Moore has his own integrity plus the integrity of his team behind him. Believe me, NASA operates as a close-knit family, like you said earlier in this program, and nobody is going to let anything go by that they feel is a safety consideration. Things that have bitten us before in the space program are things that we didn't know. We thought we knew, and then they were wrong. We've never had a failure that I know of in the space program where people stood up and said, this needs to be fixed, it's going to be a failure later on, something's going to break, this is going to blow up. If they ever say that, we go study the problem and we solve it, and we make sure finally that everybody agrees it's safe. So if you take a look back in the history of the space program, you'll find that things that have hurt us in the past have been things that we all agreed were okay, and we found out later we'd made a mistake. So I feel that that's what's going to happen here, that it's not going to be something anybody knows about at this moment.
Congressman Dimely, what about this business of allowing civilians, politicians, school teachers, and journalists? School teacher Krista McAuliffe, we all admire, we all thrilled with her when she was chosen. But as we step back and look at it, has that been premature, as former astronaut Frank Borman suggested at one time today?
Well, I think it was perfectly proper to have a school teacher on, because what we are attempting to do is to explore space and to bring this message back to our classrooms. The whole question of whether politicians ought to go reminds me very much of the media hype we witnessed for the Super Bowl. I don't think it is necessary for politicians to go up. I think scientists, of course, should go up, and a teacher, in fact, is a scientist in his or her classroom. So I think that's a proper role for a teacher.
Former director of the Space Shuttle program, Mr. Malkin, we earlier quoted a United Press International report saying that speculation, clearly underline that word, speculation in the early investigation is focusing on the spacecraft's large fuel tank, that massive external fuel tank that's manufactured by Martin Marietta Aerospace in Louisiana. Do you have any information on your own that would indicate that's true? And whether you do or not, what checks are made on these contractors for quality control?
I would say that there's no question that the source of the major amount of energy that contributed to the explosion came from the external tank. But you can't, I would be very hesitant to indict that element at this time. There's a lot of material to be gone over before we can decide that that is the case. The earlier suggestion that was showing up in the films about those little flashes from apparently coming from the solid rocket booster have to be examined very carefully to determine whether or not those are the cause. As to the quality, the control that goes into making the external tank, that's a welded aluminum structure. And there's about 1 kilometer of weld in that tank. All the joints are x-rayed, and early on in the program, they were getting to a place where there was, I think, less than an inch of weld that had to be reworked. So I would not think that that could be a problem. We have to really wait for all the data to be examined to get a better idea of what's really happened.
Mr. Malkin, we know that we've had quality control programs in things such as nuclear submarines, welds that are not exactly and precisely made. And there have been many complaints about the decline of craftsmanship and quality in the manufacture of American weaponry and things such as submarines and space shuttles. Now, surely you faced that when you were in your job as the director of the Space Shuttle program.
There is always quality issues that are dealt with, and you cannot say that everything is perfect. But the procedures that are in place to detect those things are excellent. I can't be categorically say that it was not the tank, but it's a relatively passive part of the shuttle itself. It stores a lot of energy, but not a lot is going on inside the tank. The things that are going on that are very active and is in the solid rocket boosters and in the main engines. And so that's a place that everything will be examined. That's one of the places that I'm sure will be examined very carefully.
Alan Bean, when astronauts get together to talk, do they discuss the possibility that someone who made a weld or someone who put a bolt in place might have been out late the night before, or might have been somebody's brother-in-law and got the job that way? Surely that must be a real and present fear with the astronauts.
Well, we talk about it. We wonder if the people that sewed the parachutes, for example, all worked well, if they did the weld, everything else. And NASA managers, like Mr. Malkin talked about it, they know that too. They know people do have off days. And so we've had to set up a system of check and balances in the space program to take that into account. For example, someone does the job, then you have an inspector at that point, and then you have another inspector. Then all three people agree that that is, let's say the weld is done properly. Then you take it down to the Cape, and you assemble it. You have inspectors, once again, more than one, to look at it, say that it's okay. Then you get it on the launch pad, and then you test it. You put pressure in it. You overpressure it a little bit. You do all these different tests to ensure that the fella 6 months ago or a year ago back at the factory didn't make a mistake. And when these systems of checks and balances are finished, then I think everybody has confidence. I know we as astronauts always had confidence in the hardware.
Thank you, Alan Beam. Congressman Dimely, how far, in your opinion, is the American space program set back now? A year, 2 years, less or more than that?
I would say less than a year. There's no question in my mind the program must continue, and NASA has suffered a major setback. But I think one has to look at the human factor. To what extent is pressure bringing about these delays? To what extent is pressure causing these technical difficulties? One cannot ignore these human factors, and it seems to me we need to step back a bit and re-examine the whole procedure, the whole scheduling process, which brings stress and brings pressure onto the whole production of the program.
Thank you very much, Congressman Dimely, for being with us tonight. In the hometown of Challenger astronaut Ron McNair, Lake City, South Carolina, CBS News correspondent Sandy Gilmore visited the home of Matthew Brown, McNair's former teacher, and they were joined by a former classmate, George Simmons.
And did people get together, Mr. Brown, or what happened in town?
Well, people began to make calls and to get together, and of course, as soon as we got the news as a school system, we called the administrators, principals, and asked them to have mass flags and to pass the announcement around to student bodies and teachers.
There is a Ron McNair Boulevard in town. There is a Ron McNair Square, and is this the most famous person this town has ever seen on a national basis?
Truly, most definitely, I would say that it is, and Ron himself could not believe that this street would be changed from Boulevard to Ron McNair Boulevard.
Just a last question: what are the youngsters around here now? What's their recollection of Ron McNair? Is he someone they look up to, or?
Definitely, he's a person that everybody from initially before the space shuttle, just that he was qualified to be one of the NASA astronauts, qualified him to be looked up to. And after he came and visited all the schools, this was one of his highest priority to go into the schools, and everyone from that point on knew that, even though all the achievement that he had made, his priority were, let's tell the children that the sky is the limit.
Teacher Krista McAuliffe's hometown of Concord, New Hampshire, is a city of about 30,000, a city rich in American tradition. And tonight, Charles Osgood reports Concord is a city in mourning.
There are places in this country tonight, and Concord, New Hampshire is one of them, where what happened today is being taken not so much as a public event, but as a personal loss.
A part of each and every one of us also boarded that space shuttle. And so only naturally, we feel that a part of us is gone.
My soul is longing for your peace.
All over Concord tonight, there were church services where people prayed for their friend and neighbor, Krista McAuliffe, and for her family and fellow astronauts.
And we, not understanding, are inconsolable. My soul is longing for your peace.
The same thoughts were being expressed everywhere in Concord, in the stores and streets, and on the radio. This one thing was on everyone's mind.
Many of us were watching as the craft exploded.
Along with the sense of loss, however, is the feeling that this teacher, this warm, compassionate woman, has taught us something, even in death.
And others will dare to do more and to take her place because of the example of Krista and those who perished with her today.
On the front door of the house right next door to the McCulloughs is a wreath with a picture Krista sent to Jean Timmons, one of the 8 Timmons children. On the picture, Krista wrote a little note to Jean, and this is what she said. She said, "May your future be limited only by your dreams." Charles Osgood, CBS News.
CBS News correspondent Walter Cronkite was present at the creation of the American space age, covering this nation's space program through the sunshine and the showers, from its faltering beginnings through tragedy to the triumph of man on the moon and beyond. He filed this reflection on today's catastrophe from Santiago, Chile.
Even in our moment of such deep grief, we must look ahead to the future, for such is the nature of life. There will be, of course, long investigations and examinations of what happened today at Cape Canaveral. The argument will be buttressed for those who have been opposed to manned spaceflight all along. They'll now add the question of safety to their arguments. And NASA, of course, their engineers will have to look very carefully at what happened today to make sure that it doesn't happen again. Those of us who have watched the development of our space program from the very beginning, long before man first essayed a trip into space, we saw a lot of rockets blow up on the pad, soar into space, and then be destroyed. And I think in the backs of our minds always was locked the fear that someday all that volatile fuel would get loose when man was aboard, as indeed happened today. But America's pride in what it has accomplished in space in more than a quarter of a century of safe manned flight should not be diminished by today's terrible tragedy. We have come a long way in space, and there's still so much to be done out there. There are scientific, industrial, medical bounties to be reaped in space. To diminish what we have done in the past would be to dishonor those who lost their lives in that program on Challenger today. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News, Santiago, Chile.
A CBS News program reminder, we'd like to remind you that the CBS Morning News will continue our coverage live tomorrow morning from Cape Canaveral, Florida, with Forrest Sawyer and Maria Shriver. Why do they do it? What did they die for? Francis Scobie, spacecraft commander, veteran of a previous Challenger flight. Scobie talked about it in 1984.
You have to risk something to gain something, and the risk and the gain are worth it to me. I thoroughly enjoy doing what I'm doing, and if you allow risks to keep you from doing the things in life that pleasure you and make you what you are and make you feel better about yourself, I think you're shortchanging yourself.
Do you think we'd ever accomplish anything without taking some sort of risk?
No. You might as well just go in the bedroom, close the door, and turn out the lights.
They were 10 miles high when they died today, just like the old days of test pilots of the right stuff, showing their stuff. But it was not like the old days of out on the edge, seat of the pants flying with flyers all cut from the same cloth. These were Americans from all walks, from all backgrounds. Fighter pilots with war records, payload specialists with degrees, men, women, a teacher of children, a mother. They were Christian, they were Jewish, they were humankind up there going for us, going for the brass ring, for the thrill, for the knowledge, for the future. In a paraphrase of the poet James Dickey's work, put them high on the list of men and women who counted. These searchers and seekers, these astronauts and teachers who died today in what became the spaceship disaster. They died in the blue and silver furnaces of their spacesuits. Think about them, who they were, and the way they were. Dreamers, explorers, adventurers forcing themselves past the point of danger and deep fatigue to expand our understanding of what is up there and out there. They may never have known the nature of the trouble that killed them. For them, no more cries of, wow, what a view, no more jokes with mission control, no more thumbs up for cheering crowds, no more phone calls from the president. They will not see their parents and their wives or husbands and the children meeting them. Gone with the rush of the engines and the exploding sky. Gone, but theirs were lives that mattered.
This has been a CBS News special report. Disaster in space. This is CBS.
Tonight on the Night Beat, NASA trying to understand what went so terribly wrong with the space shuttle launch today, why the Challenger blew up, killing all 7 people on board.
There are special prayers being offered for those 7 tonight. A mass in Concord, New Hampshire, Krista McAuliffe's home. Channel 3's Jeffrey Cole with a report.
And more prayers tonight in Connecticut for the astronauts and their families. We'll have a report from Naugatuck. Hilton.
Arlene, very cold weather gripping southern New England tonight. Our satellite photos show some snow on the way. We'll give you a timetable on the Night Beat weather. Bill.
In sports, we have college basketball tonight with the Hartford Hawks, plus more on the New England Patriots and their problems with drugs, apparently. Don, Marlene.
Thank you, Bill. Channel 3 team coverage of the shuttle disaster coming up next on the Night Beat.
Snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor gloom of night stays the Audi all-wheel drive 4000 CS Quattro from the swift completion of its appointed rounds. Audi, the art of engineering.
Dick Bizzuto, a 4-term state senator, Republican leader, voted Legislator of the Year by the Taxpayers Association and the state police. An unparalleled devotion to fighting drug abuse, crime, waste in government.
Connecticut is at a crossroad. Strong leadership can set the course for a decade of opportunity and growth. The time is now to strive for higher levels of achievement in education, to set new and ambitious standards for government, and a time as never before for honesty and integrity.
Three, two, one, and liftoff. Liftoff.
There was no reason to expect any trouble. The shuttles, like Challenger, could be and often were delayed. After 24 missions and today with number 25 underway, Americans had come to expect nothing but success. And a school teacher from New England aboard gave this mission a measure of added appeal. Thus, the staggering shock that something could and did go horribly wrong suddenly, a minute and 12 seconds into the flight. A launch timetable comparison with a mission from last October indicates the explosion came some 50 seconds before the rocket boosters were to separate from the shuttle. NASA, for now, can only speculate on what went wrong.
It will take all the data, careful review of that data, before we can draw any conclusions on this national tragedy.
Also speculating for Eyewitness News, science expert and president of the National Space Institute, Ben Bova.
We don't know why it happened yet, but it looks as if there was a burn-through on the main fuel tank. If you see the slow motion, you see the bright areas now, and then the explosion. That main fuel tank is holding liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen at temperatures hundreds of degrees below zero. There should be no flame coming from it. Something happened to burn through that structure and ignite those fuels and cause an explosion.
Bova says further the handling of Challenger's ice buildup before the launch might have been a factor. 2 congressmen have been on shuttle missions. Their comments.
It's been a very difficult day for me personally because I knew each of them. I trained with some of them, and I just extend my love and condolences to their families.
This system is not without risk, and everyone who climbs on one of those loaded spaceships understands that risk.
President Reagan cancels future shuttle missions until the cause of the explosion is found. He addresses the nation.
The crew of the Space Shuttle Challenger honored us for the manner in which they lived their lives. We will never forget them, nor the last time we saw them this morning, as they prepared for their journey and waved goodbye and slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God.
It had been a happy and confident crew that climbed aboard Challenger this morning just after breakfast. They'd overcome their frustrations at repeated delays and looked forward to nothing less than a great success.
Good evening, everyone. The search for what's left of the Space Shuttle Challenger is over for the night off the coast of Florida, called off until tomorrow morning.
There is no evidence and no longer any possible chance the crew survived. President Reagan was to have addressed the Congress and the nation tonight on the State of the Union. Because of the shuttle tragedy, he has postponed that address to next Tuesday night. Mr. Reagan has ordered Vice President Bush to oversee the investigation into the cause of the shuttle explosion, dispatching Mr. Bush to Florida. The president has also telegrammed Governor O'Neill and other governors a request to fly their flags at half-staff in tribute to the Challenger crew. Marlene?
Well, Don, the reason this shuttle mission was so special was the fact that Krista McAuliffe was riding along. It was good public relations for NASA to show the country that space shuttle travel was for anyone, for everyone. It drummed up our interest, and it helped generate more federal funding for NASA.
Today, I'm directing NASA to begin a search in all of our elementary and secondary schools and to choose as the first citizen passenger in the history of our space program one of America's finest, a teacher.
Teachers all across the country were eager to give it a try. 11,000 applied, and after a long selection process, one was chosen.
The winner, the teacher who will be going into space, Krista McAuliffe.
It was then that we got to know Krista McAuliffe. She grew up in Framingham, Massachusetts. She went to high school and college there. Her parents still live there. She got married, and she then moved to Concord, New Hampshire. Life there had been comfortable. Krista was a wife, mother of 2 small children, and a teacher. But now she was to be an astronaut, and life changed for her family.
Whatever the price in terms of readjustments or my taking on things that I probably should have been doing before anyway and hadn't done, whatever those prices are, they certainly pale in comparison to the opportunity.
Her first opportunity came last summer when she watched her first shuttle launch, happily thinking what it would be like for her.
The whole thing is so gorgeous. You just want to bring it all back into the classroom for the kids.
Then today it was Krista's turn. The Challenger, twice delayed, finally lifted off. But no more than 2 minutes into the air, the unthinkable happened. And Krista's parents watched from the ground, not sure of what they were seeing, hoping it was not what they feared. In a few short, fiery seconds, the lives of 7 people were snuffed out, incinerated in a massive ball of fire. Others killed on board the Challenger today: Shuttle Commander Dick Scobie, Shuttle Pilot Michael Smith. The other woman on board, Shuttle Mission Specialist Judith Resnick. Another mission specialist, Ellison Anazuko from Hawaii. The payload specialist, Gregory Jarvis, who was to handle the communication satellites. And a man with close ties to Connecticut, 35-year-old mission specialist Ronald McNair. McNair has family in Hartford's North End, and he visited this area very often, making friends who are still in shock tonight. Well, those friends of Ronald McNair's are remembering him tonight, his dream of becoming an astronaut, how hard he worked to make that dream come true, especially while studying at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Channel 3's Michael Hill talked to Connecticut friends and relatives of both Krista McAuliffe and Ron McNair.
UConn's Dean of Engineering, Dr. Wesley Harris, met 35-year-old Ronald McNair at MIT in Boston. Dr. Harris was a professor there. He remembers McNair, the student.
Ron McNair was a very serious student. His characteristics that I think stand out most was his intensity. He was a professional in every sense of the word, always dotting the I's and crossing the T's.
In Hartford, McNair's family and his #1 fan, Uncle Jerry McNair, watched the liftoff with joy and the explosion in awe.
It's a hurting thing, you know. We was awful close. He went to school and he graduated at the head of his class at MIT. So when he come down here and told me he wanted to be an astronaut, I said, well, be the best one you can be.
The astronaut had come to his uncle's bar last summer, autographing pictures for relatives and new friends.
He autographed his pictures for me with love, sincerely, and that just filled my heart up. And for me to see this come about this morning, I'm just really upset.
In Southington, cousins of teacher Krista McAuliffe say this was the first time they watched intensely the liftoff of the Space Shuttle Challenger. They say it was a good feeling the first minute and 12 seconds.
I was crying because I was so happy and excited. So, oh, there she goes, you know. With our 2 youngest children, and we were just very happy. And as one was saying, there she goes to the moon, and he was clapping quickly, the whole turn of events.
Whitney Ben says her cousin would have wanted to be remembered for her desire to explore space for the children and for not being afraid to take challenges. Whitney Ben's 6-year-old son watched the liftoff. His mother later explained the disaster, but he insisted his cousin was alive and told his mother the paramedic who parachuted out of the sky was Krista McAuliffe. Michael Hill, Channel 3 Eyewitness News, Southington.
The shock of the explosion was so complete in Concord, New Hampshire, where Krista McAuliffe taught high school social studies, that psychological counselors are brought in for students who had given no thought to the possibility this could even happen. Channel 3's Jeffrey Cole was there this morning to share what was expected to be one town's triumph.
Celebration and pride turned to shock and sorrow at Concord High School today. Students and teachers gathered to watch their teacher and friend, Krista McAuliffe, become the first teacher in space. They witnessed the explosion that killed her.
I was in the cafeteria and just everybody was, real wild and excited that it was taking off. And then after they found out what the problem was, they just kind of, everybody quieted down and just waited around to see what was going to happen. And
then we heard that there had been some difficulties and everything, and that the spaceship had blew up and it had gone into pieces. And then everybody just broke down and half the cafeteria started crying, and I didn't do anything. I just stood there for a minute, and then it didn't hit me till about an hour and a half later.
Krista McAuliffe was a social studies teacher here. No one was surprised when she was chosen to ride in the Space Shuttle Challenger. Krista McAuliffe was described today here at Concord High School as the kind of teacher who taught her students to be the best they can. The teachers also say that although McAuliffe never said it, they think she was aware of the dangers involved in flying in the space shuttle. This afternoon, 8 of her colleagues gathered to remember her.
A tremendous human being who could relate to other human beings in a caring, kind, thoughtful way.
As night fell here in Concord, people from across the city gathered at local churches to remember the woman they're calling the chosen one, Krista McAuliffe.
When she boarded that space shuttle this morning, a part of each and every one of us also boarded that space shuttle.
Mourners at St. John's Church were told Krista McAuliffe still walks among them, but this time in spirit. Jeffrey Cole, Channel 3 Eyewitness News, Concord, New Hampshire.
The BMW 5 Series. 3 luxury sedans that transform information into exhilaration, fuel into adrenaline, and other sports sedans into idle pretenders. BMW, the ultimate driving machine.
Test drive the ultimate driving machine at your Central Connecticut BMW dealers.
Bernie's offers these services at no extra charge. Sears charges extra. Whirlpool makes it easier. And during this event, Bernie's is offering even more savings on this and other Whirlpool Wash Day pairs. Whirlpool washers and dryers are known for performance and dependability. And of course, as everyone knows, at Bernie's, they're known for price. Sears charges. At Bernie's, these things are free. Come on, why pay extra?
This deposition ought to break the Foley case wide open.
The one in Washington?
Right.
I hope so.
When you have something urgent to send overnight, use Express Mail next day service from the post office. Our 2-pound pack is just $10.75, about half what most others charge. And when you need it there tomorrow, we deliver.
I don't know how to thank you.
Don't thank me, thank this.
Express Mail service. We deliver excellence for less.
Imagine cold, refreshing ice cream. Chocolate mousse, rich, light, and velvety. Now imagine the best of ice cream, the best of mousse. Mousse du jour, America's first frozen mousse dessert. All natural. Chocolate, chocolate almondine, chocolate raspberry, chocolate chip, mint, and velvety chocolate mocha. Each flavor a really new dessert. Mousse du jour. Imagine.
If you dial 1-800-CBT-LEND, you can apply for a bank loan in your pajamas.
I'd like to apply for a loan.
CBT, when you're ready to demand more from a bank.
Well, tonight the nation is mourning the astronaut deaths, asking why it had to happen, and many are turning to prayer for the strength to understand. Boston's Archbishop Cardinal Bernard Law traveled to Framingham tonight, the parish of Krista McAuliffe's family, for a special mass. He prayed for the strength to continue the living faith and the ideals that she and the others so beautifully exemplified. The Cardinal also mentioned astronaut Ron McNair, who went to MIT, and Gregory Jarvis, a graduate of Northeastern University. Don.
A special service was also held tonight in Naugatuck, Connecticut at St. Vincent Ferrer Catholic Church, a memorial service with Father Edna Dolney presiding. Channel 3's Bertha Coombs was there and files this Night Beat report.
They had no especial personal ties to the Shuttle Challenger crew, but like many across the country, parishioners at St. Vincent Ferrer Church in Naugatuck felt the need to mourn tonight.
These weren't just 7 astronauts. These were people that we fell in love with as they continued to prepare for one of many journeys. And it just didn't hit 7 people. It just didn't hit these families that were watching in awe and then in horror. It hit every one of us.
Father Edna Dolney organized the impromptu service.
And it was obvious tonight everybody had a need to pray and cry together because it was a member of our family that went to heaven today.
The service was held to mourn the loss of all 7 crew members, but for many it was clearly the loss of teacher Krista McAuliffe, which made the reality of today's tragedy hit home.
You put yourself in the parents' places, the children's. We all lost, everybody lost.
That today we found that in science, as in life, there's 3 steps forward and 1 step backwards, and this was certainly a step backwards for mankind.
It's really something you expect that's going to come off well, and when something like this happens, it touches home to everybody.
I heard it before lunchtime, and everybody just stopped working. It was a great sadness. They were all heroes, very brave people, too.
The space program, I believe, is going to go on. It's got to go on now because of them, because of what they did. They gave their lives. We've got to keep going.
In Naugatuck, Bertha Coombs, Channel 3 Eyewitness News on the Night Beat.
Tonight, several Connecticut companies are waiting to see what the NASA investigation proves. 3 of them, United Technologies, Kaman, and Ensign Bickford, are all involved in the shuttle program, especially the shuttle's propulsion system, which in the past has worked flawlessly. We get more on this end of the story from our business editor, Jim Weisfich.
Liftoff, and Connecticut's corporations immediately play a major role. The 2 booster rockets providing the main thrust are manufactured by United Technologies' Norden Systems. Much of the work is contracted out, but the company says it does make the nose cone and aft skirt. The shuttle rockets are powered by fuel from the main tank. Baffles inside that tank prevent the fuel from shifting back and forth during liftoff. They are made by the Kaman Corporation in Bloomfield. At separation on a normal flight, the separation motors are also manufactured by United Technologies. The detonating fuse that carries the order is made by the Ensign Bickford Company in Simsbury. United Technologies Booster Production Company also recovers the booster rockets after they separate and fall into the sea. They then return them to the facility and refurbish them. In 1984, Norden won a major $270 million shuttle support contract as well. In fact, more than 50% of Norden's sales in 1984 resulted from booster and shuttle support contracts, about $350 million worth.
No doubt it'll be months before we know if any of Connecticut's corporations were involved in today's tragedy. For the moment, though, all of those corporations are remaining silent. I'm Jim Weisfich, Channel 3 Eyewitness News on the Night Beat.
Channel 3 team coverage tonight takes us to the Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. The museum is a memorial to those who give their lives to air and space. Washington Bureau reporter Sean Briggs sampling reaction there tonight for this report via News Satellite 3.
The crowd gathered not at the model of the space shuttle, but a television screen in front of it. Some had not heard the news until they came here to the Air and Space Museum.
Shocked, just terribly shocked, because we've taken these space trips so for granted.
Paul Bowles made a special trip to leave flowers.
I feel very badly about everything that happened today. I was really shocked by what happened. And I felt I had to express it somehow.
France also has a space program, Yves Janin tells us. At his home in Paris, he's certain his friends are sad.
We think it's a very safe engine, and we are very surprised.
The tragedy prompted Christine Krebs to buy a shuttle pin.
I was shocked and surprised, and I'm praying they don't close the space program down because of it.
And prompted an Air Force cadet to remind us.
The astronauts there, and certainly pilots in any service, you don't expect this to happen, but you know it's possible. It's a reality of what you're doing.
By tomorrow, the museum director says a small memorial, a picture, will be added to the exhibit.
We knew them personally, and they're all such outstanding individuals. Every one of them is a fine individual, a fine human being, and the loss is great.
But in fact, this Air and Space Museum exists as a memorial, as the dedication plaque says, to those who have devoted their lives to the exploration of air and space. In Washington, Sean Briggs, Channel 3 Eyewitness News.
There's more coming up on the Night Beat, including late word on our local weather forecast.
Hilton tonight has the outlook for the week ahead when Eyewitness News continues on the Night Beat.
A clogged fuel injector can make your car slow, sluggish, unresponsive. But only 2 tankfuls of advanced formula Mobile Super Unleaded can actually start to unclog fuel injectors. To give your car a new injection of power. Mobile Super Unleaded, high octane, with a plus.
But that's